In the past few decades, some progress has been made in reducing gender inequality, particularly in relation to SRHR. However, despite this progress, many gaps still remain. SRHR is essential for the empowerment of women and to all quality of life issues concerning social, economical, and political participation. Lack of access to SRHR not only impedes the rights of youth's health, but it also makes them more vulnerable to gender-based violence, HIV/AIDS, maternal mortality, teenage pregnancy, and unsafe abortions. The Asia-Pacific region has a significant youth dividend who hold the power to the main drivers of change. Young people themselves are voicing their demands. ARRO's work addresses inequality and violation of sexual and reproductive rights through an intersectional lens to benefit young people in all their diversity. In doing so, ARRO takes into account that oppression and discrimination aggravates young people's lives. All of ARRO's data and research suggests that young people's SRHR is further compounded by religious and cultural moral codes deep-rooted in patriarchy.
I'm Siva Thanendran, and I'm the Executive Director of ARRO. In 2016, we at ARRO had planned for the preparation for the next strategic plan, which was supposed to take place from 2017 to 2021. So in 2016, we were to invite our partners, set out what the regional priorities will look like. And then suddenly when we were planning this process, we were just thinking, hey, what if, young people could actually have a strategic plan? Would young people give us a strategic plan that was completely different in terms of priorities and strategies and asks as compared to our usual partners who are comprised of women's rights organizations and service providers. And in line and parallel to the strategic planning meeting, we decided to have a youth strategizing meeting as well. And from there, we invited young people and from the organizations they were in across the different countries in Asia to come and tell us what they thought ARRO can provide of value to the young people's organizations in the region. And that really made a difference in how we carried out our work with young people and youth-led organizations from that point onwards.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. From Geneva, my name is Pascal Alote. I co-chair the Lancet Commission on Gender and Global Health, together with my colleagues Sarah Hawkes and SAHAJ. We've had a bit of a hiatus, and in re-engaging, there's a strong, constant sense of transitioning as we move past the COVID period and relearn some good habits and hopefully drop some of the bad ones. But constant learning is the main message today. So welcome back to this second season of our Lancet series in conversation with our Lancet colleagues, the commissioners on the Lancet colleagues. For this webinar, please join the conversation. It's available through Twitter and it's live streaming as well through YouTube. Tell us, use the chat the chat format, and please tell us your name and where you're from. We're always happy to welcome new faces. Please put any questions you have in the question and answer box. Share your thoughts and comments in the chat box. Please do indicate whether you consent for your comments and suggestions to be analyzed, obviously anonymized if you would rather, to be shared in future materials by the organizers. And for those joining us on Zoom, we have a Hindi live translation as well. Please participate and enjoy. This is for all our constant learning across all of us. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the main facilitator and commissioner for this webinar. Renu Khanna is a feminist women's health and rights activist. She is co-founder of SAHAJ, Society for Health Alternatives, which is a 38-year-old community-based organization based in Gujarat in India. SAHAJ has been deeply involved with adolescent and young people's gender and sexual and reproductive health and rights issues for the last 20 years. Renu has over 4 decades of experience as a trainer, action researcher, evaluator, and policy analyst in India. She is absolutely awesome. She's on the governing boards and steering committees of several national and international organizations and networks. For example, the People's Health Movement, the Feminist Policy Collective, the Health Equity Network India, HENI, Common Health, which is the Coalition for Reproductive Abortion, and COAPASA, the Community of Practitioners on Accountability and Social Action in Health. Renu is going to lead us through a facilitated discussion with work that she's been engaged with young people and is critical input into the Lancet Commission on Gender and Global Health. Renu, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Pascal. Good day and welcome to all of you who have joined us. We hope to have rich discussions today with our young panelists, as well as all of you who are with us. This webinar is devoted to the concerns and issues of adolescents and young people, and also solutions and promising practices to guide our future action. Next slide, please. So what's the context in which we are discussing these concerns? Almost 30 years ago, the International Conference on Population and Development placed adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights on the global agenda. And in this period, several advancements have happened, both at policy and program level, as well as within specific adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. Countries have developed policies and programs for adolescents and young people based on data and standards and protocols, like, for instance, adolescent-friendly health services. Diversity of adolescents and young people is being recognized, Youth-led organizations are emerging and demanding a space at the table. According to UNICEF in 2019, as we just saw in the video which played before, as all of you were joining in, almost 16% of the global population is in the age group of 10 to 19 years. South Asia, East Asia, Pacific regions are home to the largest share of adolescents. Next slide, please. But despite the progress, many gaps remain. While water and sanitation and health programs have begun focusing on menstrual hygiene, taboos around menstruation remain entrenched. Adolescent sexuality continues to be viewed as dangerous, unsafe, and to be controlled. Gender norms consider sex before marriage as taboo, but put tremendous pressure on girls to prove their fertility after marriage. Pressures of hegemonic masculinity contribute to young men's violence towards girls and gender non-conforming young people. In addition to social barriers, legal barriers prevent realization of adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights. Parental or spousal consent, the debates around age at marriage versus age of consent. In the context of India, for instance, the POCSO Act, which criminalizes even consensual sexual activity among underage young persons, continue to be huge barriers. Health system barriers exist. Where adolescent reproductive and sexual health services exist, they are not necessarily adolescent friendly. Provider attitudes and biases continue to prevent adolescent friendly services. Lack of adolescent sexual and reproductive health services in many, many contexts, including comprehensive sexuality education, through schools, is an issue. And the next slide, please. As we move towards the 2030s SDGs goalposts, how can we build on the lessons learned? So we are hoping that the discussions today will answer or take us towards some of these questions. How can we make policies and programs that meet the aspirations of diverse groups of young people, and not just adolescent girls programs, but also for boys and gender non-conforming groups, for young people living with disabilities, for Dalit young people, indigenous young people, those who still fail to reach educational institutions. We need policies and programs that will respond to the needs of all these different groups. How can political commitment be enhanced that will result in more investment for adolescents and young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights? Will it create space for meaningful participation of different groups of young people? How can intersectoral laws and policies create enabling environment for transformation of gender norms? So these are some of the things that, some of the questions that we hope that we will engage with today. Next slide, please. So I want to acknowledge that this webinar is hosted, of course, by the Lancet Commission, but in collaboration with SAHAJ, my organization, and ARROW, which is a regional resource group, feminist resource group in the Asia Pacific region. And in today's webinar, we want to create a platform for young people representing diverse communities across the region and to connect them with duty bearers to facilitate a dialogue. We're going to have two panels. The first panel is going to focus on the challenges that these young people will speak about and the concerns that, that they have. And the second panel, we hope will bring out some solutions and good practices which can be upscaled and lead to a betterment as we go along. We also hope that the persons who've registered and are on YouTube and other live channels will participate in the discussions through the chat function. We hope that this is not going to be a one-off engagement. You can find all the 3 organizing partners on social media. So please do continue discussions beyond this webinar. The next slide, please. Before we move into our panels, I want to acknowledge specific persons from these organizing, from the organizing team. Manushi and Sangeeta are program coordinators with SAHAJ. Sai is the Deputy Executive Director at Arrow. From the Lancet Commission, we have Emma and Tiffany, who've been supporting us very, very ably throughout this planning process. Our translator today is Subarna Ghosh. The moderators for the first panel, we have Farah Rom, a sexual and reproductive health and rights advocate from Malaysia. In 2019, she founded For Youth Initiative in Kuala Lumpur, which does creative online advocacy. And currently, she's the Information and Communication Officer at Arrow. Souvik Pine is our second moderator, and he's been an active youth and abortion rights advocate with the YP Foundation in India. He's also currently the chair of Common Health, a coalition for reproductive health and safe abortion. And they are the ones who will now carry on this dialogue in these 2 panels. So over to you, Farah.
Thank you so much, Renu, for the kind introduction. I hope I'm audible for everyone. Assalamualaikum and hello. My name is Farah Rom and I'm from Malaysia and I am the Information and Communications Officer. Yes?
Go ahead.
हाँ, but अभी आपने बोला ना, हाँ, मुझे तो समझ आ रहा है. मैं पूजा के लिए मैं वेट कर रही थी.
Excuse me,
But
Manushi.
पूजा को,
please
मैं
mute
Manushi.
yourself. Please mute yourself. Yeah, sorry, Farah. Please carry on.
No worries. So I am the Information and Communications Officer from Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women Arrow. And I would like to thank everyone again to spend your time here. And I welcome you to the first panel of our In Conversation with Renu Khanna Perspectives and Initiatives of Young People in All Their Diversity webinar. So as an introduction, as we talk about young people, they are a diverse set of populations that have various needs and concerns. They face unique challenges that are often left unaddressed due to lack of acknowledgement, understanding, and also awareness by decision makers in developing policies or programs related to young people. Young people's voices are often excluded from important conversations and decision making, which makes them vulnerable to marginalization and exclusion. With that, we actually dedicate this panel to hearing the voices of young people on the ground that will be speaking up about the issues and challenges that they are facing. And with me today, we have 3 panelists, which is Jivitesh, Pooja, and Pima, who will enlighten us on the current state of young people in their own community or country context, as well as their own personal challenges they're facing as a young person. And I would like to take a bit of time to introduce the panel speakers to the audience. So Jivitesh is the youngest member of STEPS, which stands for Stepping Towards Enhancing Policy Structures. It is a youth-led, youth-run volunteer group anchored by the YP Foundation, New Delhi. And he passionately advocates for meaningful participation, capacity building, and representation of very young adolescents around the age of 10 to 14 years old. And Pooja is a 20 years old young person with disability from India. And she passed her bachelor's in commerce with distinction and currently is doing her master's in commerce while working part-time at a small pharma company. And as many others, she seeks for opportunities that would enable her to give back to her family in the future. Last but not least, we have Pima. Pima is an indigenous youth belonging to Mugum indigenous community from Nepal, and she is the secretary of Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, or short form for NEFIN, Karnali, an umbrella organization of indigenous people. And she is a feminist and indigenous activist working for the promotion of the rights of marginalized people. So diving into the questions, so the first round we'll be discussing the challenges that are faced by young people. Before that, I would like to invite all of our virtual audience to share with us, in line with the question that we'll be asking the speakers, if you are a young person or identify yourself as a young person, what are the challenges you yourself are facing as a young person in your own community or in your own country? And don't forget to include your country and indicate your consent for the comment to be shared. And don't worry that we will be keeping your identity anonymous. So you can share your comments throughout the panel speaker. Okay, so let's go to the first panelist. So Jivitesh, as I mentioned before, you are the youngest speaker in today's webinar, representing a very specific group, which is very young adolescents group. And me, myself, and I'm sure all of our audience is really curious about the challenges or the issues that very young adolescents are facing in fulfilling their potential. And Jivitesh, based on your observation and your own experience, share with us the challenges that you and your peers are facing as a young person in terms of your access to civic spaces, healthcare, and overall well-being.
Thank you, Ron. To start with, let me express my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed organizers, moderators, and panelists for giving me this opportunity of conversation with the Honorable Commissioner of Lancet Commission on Gender and Global Health. I belong to and represent the community of very young adolescents aged 10 to 14 years, which is a very underrepresented group globally in the context of their meaningful engagement in the processes of stakeholder consultations related to policy planning, policy implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. You would certainly appreciate that very few VYAs like me are currently voicing their concerns. We must think why this is so. The challenges which we as a community face are myriad, such as lack of affordable quality education, access to cultural barriers, prevalence of harmful practices such as child marriages, illegal adoption, child labor, sexual abuse, lack of youth-friendly ASRHR information, or barriers in accessing such services in our academic institutions and healthcare facilities, inaccessible legal aid, etc. We are perceived as perfectly healthy beings, having limited exposure. We are minor as per law, but it does not mean we do not have a right to participate in stakeholder consultations. Further, myths or stereotypes in society, ignorance of our mentors, our parents or guardians, our local, national, and regional governments cannot be an excuse for our underrepresentation in stakeholder consultations. We must be considered equal among all stakeholders, at least for policies, programs, and activities meant for us. Even if we are given an opportunity for participation in stakeholder consultations, it should not be tokenistic in nature, and our suggestions must be valued. Recently, I participated in virtual multi-stakeholder consultations on draft National Youth Policy 2021. Me and my sister suggested to rename the policy to National Adolescent and Youth Policy 2021. But in the final compiled document of suggestions that was forwarded to the concerned ministry, our suggestions were excluded. This is an example of tokenistic participation instead of active and meaningful participation, where remedial measures are needed. I remain optimistic that my contribution and active representation of very young adolescents in various prestigious events, such as this, would certainly encourage more and more very young adolescents to step forward and volunteer for civic action in due course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jivitesh. We learn very much from you because very young adolescents' issues are not often highlighted. I think it's also because they're seen as incapable or really, really young to process things when actually they are excellent people who, like you said, they learn very, very fast. And this shows how there are diversity in young people when it comes to age group or their abilities, for example. And as we are talking about diversity in young people, conversations surrounding young people with disabilities are always sidelined, and estimates suggest that there are between 180 and 220 million youth with disabilities worldwide, and nearly 80% of them live in developing countries. So moving on to Pooja. Pooja, as a young person living with disability, can you tell us a bit about your own disability and other types of disabilities out there that we might not be aware of, and the obstacles you yourself face in your day-to-day life when it comes to attaining to your basic rights to education, opportunities, health, and safety? Over to you, Pooja.
हेलो, आर यू अडोरेबल? आई एम अडोरेबल?
Yes.
मुझे सुन सकते हैं आप लोग? ओके। गुड मॉर्निंग। मेरा नाम पूजा काटवा है और मुझे लो विजन की डिसेबिलिटी है। इतने बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म पे मुझे अपनी बात शेयर करने का मौका मिला है, उसके लिए मैं धन्यवाद करना चाहती हूँ। तो मैं बताऊं कि जब मेरा जन्म हुआ और जब मेरे पेरेंट्स को पता चला मेरी लो विजन डिसेबिलिटी के बारे में, तो सोसाइटी मुझे जो नॉन डिसेबल बच्चे हैं उससे एक अलग नजरिए से देखा करती थी और मेरे साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होने लग गया था। पर मेरे पेरेंट्स और मेरे सिबलिंग ने कभी मेरे साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन नहीं किया। अब मैं बात करूं विकलांग युवा समुदाय के बारे में, तो जब मैं 6 साल की थी और मुझे एडमिशन के लिए ज़रूरत थी स्कूल में, तो वहाँ के जो भी प्रिंसिपल्स थे, वो मुझे कहीं पर भी एडमिशन्स नहीं देते थे नॉन डिसेबल स्कूल में। फिर वो ये प्रेफ़र करते थे प्रिंसिपल्स कि आप इन्हें स्पेशल स्कूल में पढ़ा दो या उधर भेज दो। पर मेरे पेरेंट्स को स्पेशल स्कूल क्या है, वो कहाँ आई है, उसके बारे में पता ही नहीं था। उसके बाद जैसे-तैसे करके मेरे पेरेंट्स ने मेरा एडमिशन नॉन डिसेबल स्कूल में करवा दिया। उसके बाद भी मेरे लिए चैलेंजेस कम नहीं थे। वहाँ के जो बच्चे थे वो मेरे फ्रेंड्स नहीं बनते थे, सब मुझे इग्नोर करते थे मेरी डिसेबिलिटी को लेकर। जो टीचर्स थे वो मुझ पे स्पेसिफिक इंडिविजुअल फोकस नहीं रखते थे, मुझे लास्ट बेंच पर बिठा दिया करते थे। और कोई स्पोर्ट्स या कल्चरल एक्टिविटीज़ हो तो उसमें मैं पार्ट नहीं ले पाती थी। तो मैं और मेरे जैसी ऐसी कई लड़कियाँ हैं जिनके साथ ऐसी डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होता है। वो जहाँ पर पढ़ते हैं, जहाँ जॉब करते हैं, वहाँ ऐसा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर नहीं है, ऐसा डिसेबिलिटी फ्रेंडली माहौल नहीं है। फिर जैसे-तैसे करके मैंने मेरा बैचलर कंप्लीट किया और फिर जब मेरे घर की फाइनेंशियल कंडीशन ठीक नहीं है, तो मुझे जॉब की ज़रूरत पड़ी। तो मैं इंटरव्यू के लिए भी गई। इंटरव्यू मेरा शॉपिंग मॉल में था, वहाँ मैं सिलेक्ट भी हो गई। पर जब मैं नेक्स्ट डे जॉब के लिए गई, तो वहाँ की एक सीनियर फैकल्टी में से किसी ने ऐसा कह दिया कि आप यहाँ जॉब नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि आपको डिसेबिलिटी है। तो मुझे मेरा जो अंदर से ऐसा नेगेटिव रिजेक्शन मिला, तो मैं बहुत बहुत दुखी हो गई, बहुत उदास हो गई। पर फिर भी मैंने 25 जितने इंटरव्यूज दिए, लेकिन सभी जगह से रिजेक्शन ही मिला मुझे, जस्ट बिकॉज मेरी डिसेबिलिटी। उसके बाद फिर जब अभी करंट जो मैं जॉब कर रही हूँ, वो भी मेरे लिए सेटिस्फेक्शन वाली नहीं है, ना सैलरी ना काम, क्योंकि वो जॉब भी मुझे मेरे फादर के रेफरेंस से मिली है। जो जॉब मुझे मेरी बैचलर डिग्री पे या मेरी स्किल पे चाहिए, वैसी जॉब मुझे नहीं मिली है। और अब मैं बात करूँ हेल्थ की, तो हेल्थ जो डिसेबल्स है उनके हेल्थ के इश्यूज के बारे में कोई बात ही नहीं करता है, क्योंकि आंगनवाड़ी, सबसे पहले तो मुझे यही नहीं पता है कि आंगनवाड़ी क्या है। मुझे अभी तक नहीं पता है कि उसकी सर्विसेज क्या होती है, वहाँ की जो एडवोकेशंस के सर्विसेज होती है वो क्या होती है, क्योंकि आज तक आंगनवाड़ी के वर्कर्स मुझ तक पहुंचे ही नहीं है। वो जो फूड पैकेजिंग हो या रस्सी हो गई, वो कुछ भी मुझ तक अभी तक पहुंचा नहीं, क्योंकि आंगनवाड़ी में मेरा नाम रजिस्टर ही नहीं है। तो ये जनरल हेल्थ की बात थी। और अब मैं लास्टली बात करूँ तो सेक्सुअल एंड रिप्रोडक्टिव हेल्थ के बारे में, तो जब तक मैं नीता मैम से और सहज संस्था से जुड़ी, तब मुझे कॉन्ट्रासेप्शंस के बारे में, अबॉर्शन के बारे में, मासिक धर्म के बारे में पता चला। और मैं चाहती हूँ कि ये इंफॉर्मेशन हर डिसेबल्स और नॉन डिसेबल्स युवा युवतियों को मिलनी चाहिए, क्योंकि ये उनके लिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है। थैंक यू।
Thank you so much, Pooja, for shining a light on the challenges that you yourself are facing and for other youth with disabilities are going through as well. And I think it's really important to have more of these platforms, these conversations, to include youth with disabilities, because these are where their voices are heard. And when these are a common practice, maybe in the future, it can be also a common practice for decision makers to do the same thing, especially in creating policies for them. And now I'm going to invite Pema to share with all of us as an Indigenous youth and your experience working with young people. Can you share with us the obstacles you have encountered amongst young people pertaining to their sexual reproductive health and rights through the lens of Indigenous youth?
Thank you very much. Indigenous greetings to all. Thank you, moderator, for the introduction and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences and challenges of Indigenous youth regarding sexual and reproductive health rights. I'm Pima Wangma and belong to Mugam Indigenous community and Indigenous minority from one of the most rural area of Nepal. Indigenous youth and youth from rural areas' access to sexual and reproductive health rights is challenged due to the inadequate levels of knowledge about sexual and reproductive education, the stigma associated with sexual education being too mature or being a concept too mature for young people, and inappropriate or poor quality health services. Addition to that, the prevalence of discriminatory social practices, negative attitude towards Indigenous women and girls, and the limited power Indigenous youth have over their sexual and reproductive rights makes Indigenous youth and youth in general vulnerable and vulnerable to sexual and reproductive health violations, health right violations. Moreover, some specific issues of Indigenous youth relating to the collective rights of Indigenous peoples, such as the free, prior, and informed consent (FPIC), and the cultural views of Indigenous peoples, forced evictions, internal displacements, and militarization have constantly held Indigenous youth unprotected and vulnerable to sexual harassment and abuses. Adding these factors with the poor educational and economic status of Indigenous people results in their overall poor sexual and reproductive health. As researchers has shown national data as extreme as 2 to 3 times higher rates of sexual violence against Indigenous women and girls compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts. Additionally, we lack national disaggregated data on the status of youth in all their diversity regarding their access to sexual reproductive health rights, and with Indigenous identity still not being recognized by the state in most of the countries, they are further lagging behind in the national researches, studies, and statistics. This causes discriminatory and biased policies, further contributing to the poor status of Indigenous youth regarding their access and awareness on sexual and reproductive health rights, making them more vulnerable towards these kind of situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Pima. And we can see, as compared to all of these three speakers, there are many layers in terms of young people's characteristics, where they're coming from, and their age group, and they have various different type of challenges that they're facing, and these need to be heard, these need to be addressed. And this is important because we want to empower young people and provide them with the needs, with their specific needs, as well as to let them progress in the future. And I think, Jivitish, looking back at the challenges you have raised previously as a very young adolescent, what do you think very young adolescents need to support the development in ensuring that no one is left behind?
Thank you, ma'am. We are quick learners, and with proper resources, incentives, and opportunities, we can do justice to our role as a responsible global citizen. All we aspire for is an enabling environment. Let me share some pointers here. The most critical component for positive change is the proactive approach of our parents or guardians in our collaborative developmental processes. Ideally, they should understand our needs and aspirations during our life cycles of childhood and adolescence. Accordingly, they should also invest some time stepping out of their comfort zones and actively engage with us in our collaborative developmental processes through learning, unlearning, and relearning. There is enough research evidence that parents or guardians of very young adolescents are reluctant in providing them with comprehensive sexuality education, CSC, due to fear of their self-experimentation or adoption of self-harming behaviors. On the basis of my personal experience in civic action since June 2021 till date, I now understand that very young adolescents would be rather saved from self-harm and sexual abuse through an early intervention in the form of comprehensive sexuality education. This knowledge helps in smooth transition into adulthood and also impacts the health-seeking behavior of adolescents. It is everyone's collective responsibility to ensure we get justice and respect we deserve as global citizens. Our Ministry of Education, through public-private partnerships, may mandate capacity building of our teachers or school counselors through ASRHR toolkits, field manuals, or reproductive health in humanitarian settings, and minimum initial service packages for SRH in crisis situations. This knowledge would help them to bring much needed change in their families, neighborhood networks, as well as their workplaces. The civil society organizations, CSOs, are also not doing enough for us. Merely providing us membership in youth networks is not going to create an impact. Further, application of self-directed adult learning approach for us may be counterproductive in our case. Most of us need careful hand-holding, at least in the beginning, sustained mentoring, and dedicated funding for projects meant for us. We need our youth networks to not to succumb to donor agenda. They must conserve their freedom of utilizing funds and set aside some funds to create incentives and opportunities for us. Further, their concerted efforts to co-create a call to action for rights of very young adolescents and also facilitating our participation in the intergenerational dialogues or interaction with lawmakers would also help us to think and act as peer leaders and agents of positive change and to have productive, impactful professional identities in future. An enabling environment of experiential learning is needed. We aspire for a different kind of training to develop awareness and sensitivity for current global and regional issues of concern, to identify and raise voices through effective feedback mechanisms regards existing gaps in our pedagogy, and to learn the art of problem solving as early as possible. We must have awareness about regional issues of concern like adolescent sexual and reproductive health, gender, and global health. We need to learn self-care and to practice advocacy for health. We need to interact with other children of our age who are not so fortunate and are facing unimaginable adversities under inhospitable conditions. We need a mentoring platform and funding to reach out to those amongst us in need of help in order to empower them through right education and incentives. In India, such activities may be incorporated as a part of social science practicum with focus on liberal education as per provisions of National Education Policy 2020. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jivitesh. Wow, that is a really comprehensive, solid recommendations. And I can't imagine myself in your age, Jivitesh, and I hope with all the recommendations, the necessary people would listen to it. And maybe in the future, we can have more Jivitesh out there. So next, I would like to pose a question for Pooja. What kind of changes would you like to see for young people with disabilities for them to be able to realize their full potential?
सजेशन की बात करूं तो सबसे पहले हर विकलांग व्यक्ति को नॉर्मल लाइफ जीने का अधिकार है, पर उसके लिए ऐसा माहौल, ऐसा सपोर्ट, ऐसी फैसिलिटीज और ऐसा इंक्लूजन होना जरूरी है। गवर्नमेंट की एक स्कीम है विकलांग पेंशन योजना, जिसमें ऐसा बीपीएल का क्राइटेरिया है कि 0 से 20 का स्कोर हो और जिनकी डिसेबिलिटी 80% से अप हो, उनके लिए सिर्फ पर मंथ 1000 ही पेंशन मिले। पर पहले तो ये जो बीपीएल का क्राइटेरिया है वो हट जाना चाहिए। सभी विकलांग के लिए, सभी डिसेबल्स के लिए ये पेंशन योजना जरूरी है। और दूसरा ये कि महंगाई के जमाने में पर मंथ 2 से 3000 पेंशन हो जाना चाहिए। फिर बात करूं हेल्थ की, तो जो हेल्थ सेंटर्स है वहाँ डिसेबल्स के लिए स्वीकृति होनी चाहिए। वहाँ जैसे नॉन डिसेबल्स को ट्रीटमेंट दी जाती है, वैसी ही डिसेबल्स को उनकी डिसेबिलिटी को न ध्यान में रख के उन्हें भी ऐसी ही क्वालिटी ट्रीटमेंट मिलनी चाहिए। जो हेल्थ केयर प्रोवाइडर्स है वो डिसेबल्स के प्रति सेंसिटिव होने चाहिए और वो डिसेबल्स को और उनकी फीलिंग्स को समझ सके, ऐसे होने चाहिए। क्योंकि हम जानते हैं और डाटा भी ये कहता है कि सबसे ज्यादा अब्यूज डिसेबल्स के साथ होता है, फिर चाहे वो मानसिक हो, सेक्सुअल हो या फिजिकल अब्यूज हो, इकोनॉमिकल अब्यूज हो, तो वो डिसेबल्स के साथ बहुत ज्यादा होता है। तो मैं गवर्नमेंट से गुजारिश करूंगी कि वो अपने कानून को स्ट्रिक्टली फॉलो करे और मॉनिटरिंग और सुपरविजन को भी स्ट्रिक्ट बनाए। फिर मैं बात करूं एम्प्लॉयमेंट और एजुकेशन की, तो एजुकेशनल में 5% और एम्प्लॉयमेंट में 4% डिसेबल्स के लिए अनामत है और वो अनामत बढ़नी चाहिए। और एम्प्लॉयमेंट सेक्टर हो, एजुकेशनल सेक्टर हो, अर्बन सेक्टर्स हो या कोई भी संस्था हो, वहाँ डिसेबल्स के लिए डिसेबल फ्रेंडली माहौल होना चाहिए। उनकी डिसेबिलिटी को ध्यान में रख के ऐसे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स होने चाहिए जैसे कि व्हील चेयर्स, साइन लैंग्वेज हो, ब्रील लिपि, पिकअप ड्रॉप की सुविधा और ऐसी सारी सुविधाएं होनी चाहिए। और उनके लिए काउंसलिंग के प्रोग्राम्स भी होने चाहिए। लास्टली मैं बात करूं सोसाइटी के बारे में, क्योंकि सबसे ज्यादा डिस्क्रिमिनेशन डिसेबल्स के साथ सोसाइटी करती है, तो सोसाइटी में भी सेंसिटाइजेशन के प्रोग्राम्स होने चाहिए और वो डिसेबल्स के लिए सपोर्टिव होने चाहिए। दैट्स ऑल। मुझे सुनने के लिए थैंक यू।
Thanks, Pooja, for reminding us that discrimination doesn't just happen in terms of not having the proper infrastructure, but actually it comes from the society themselves. And as a society, we have a responsibility to resolve that so that young people with disabilities can prosper even further in their future. Last but not least, again, I would like to pose a question to Pima. And Pima, what should be done differently by decision makers to improve the sexual reproductive health and rights of young Indigenous people?
Thank you, moderator, for the question. As this year's theme of International Youth Days goes with intergenerational solidarity with the focus on leveraging the potential of all generations, this needs to be realized in action. Indigenous youth face marginalization as a result of historical discrimination, exclusion, cultural assimilation, and deprivation of their resources, including land and traditional knowledge. So this needs to be recognized by the state and provide accessible, adequate, and quality healthcare for Indigenous people and youth with due acknowledgement of their collective rights and traditional health system as the right approach to ensure Indigenous youth access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Priority should be given to comprehensive sexuality education, CSE, as mandatory in schools to promote peer education with active engagements of Indigenous youth to promote a safe and enabling environment for knowledge transmission on sexual and reproductive health education to reduce the risk associated with unsafe sex for young people. Discriminatory policies and budgets and the indirect discrimination as a result of these discriminatory policies are major structural factors preventing many Indigenous people and youth from enjoying sexual and reproductive health and rights. So, the active engagement of Indigenous youth and youth in all their diversity is crucial in the design of policies and programs. Similarly, Indigenous youth should be the part of the design and implementation of culturally appropriate community-based interventions and health services to integrate Indigenous perspectives into health measures along with sexual and gender-based violence reporting systems. These will enable a more operational and accessible system for Indigenous youth and India youth from different marginalized communities and everyone in general, especially for those residing in rural areas. Progressive change is a constant effort, and youth in all their diversity should be at the front in building it. Youth in all their diversity focusing on reaching the furthest far, especially to the marginalized communities, Indigenous communities, youth with disabilities, and those residing in the rural and underdeveloped areas should have meaningful participation and due recognition of their experiences and narratives in determining their future and promoting self-advocates of youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pima, for that very detailed outlook on what can actually be done differently by decision makers in every layers of society. And we should be taking into account all of, when I said all, with whatever the speaker has mentioned before, Pema, Jivitish, and Puja.
हाँ, टेक्निकली सुनाई नहीं दे रहा हमें।
Needs. And when we take our time to listen to the young people on the ground, we can identify the existing inequalities and develop an inclusion to solve them. And some of the recommendations mentioned by our panelists to better improve the state of young people includes really extensive lists of decision makers, and this includes policymakers, politicians, our parents, CSOs, and even for the young people themselves to go out there and let their voices heard. And what we can summarize here is that young people need specific infrastructure when it comes to different communities, different age groups. And when we consult young people, we know what's going on the ground, and we know how to solve it. And definitely one of the and when we have the data, we can better understand the gravity of the issue and address their unique vulnerabilities through adequate budget allocations for community-focused program implementation. And realizing their full potential means substantial change needs to take place in policymaking, program planning involving multiple stakeholders. And young people should definitely be given a seat at the decision-making table to ensure their voices are heard and included. I would like to leave you with a phrase that says, imagine the possibilities if every young person with their own needs and challenges were supported and empowered to fulfill their potential. And young people are becoming increasingly involved in fixing the issues that they're facing, and who are better at finding the solutions but young people themselves. And this is a perfect segue for us to move on to the next panel that will be moderated by Sovic, and who will dive into promising practices and potential solutions for young people. I'm closing the first panel, and thank you so much. Over to you, Sovic.
Greetings to everyone, and thank you so much, Farah, for moderating the previous panel. It was really very heartening to see how young people from very diverse spaces, background, identities were able to articulate their challenges. It was heartbreaking also to see the struggles because of their different identities they keep on facing. And often solutions which is done at a systematic level do not acknowledge the diversity and the heterogeneity within the young people group in itself. So we definitely need to think of solutions and practices which are not a one size fits all kind of an approach. We definitely need to be more inclusive in our approaches. There is need to be accountability also of different stakeholders and sectors who are involved in ensuring there's an enabling environment for young people to foster and advance their causes, and so they're supported in their approaches. So I think it definitely makes a great segue to now understand a few of some of the good practices and some of the promising initiatives which have been taken by young people themselves, and as well as by different multilateral agencies who are also supporting young people in this endeavor. To just introduce our esteemed panelists for this session, I would go ahead with sharing a little bit of the bios of each one. So Ahmed Nisar is the first panelist. So Ahmed Nisar is the founder of Changemaker, which is a grassroots youth-led organization focusing on providing quality education to vulnerable children. Since 2018, he has actively advocated for changing policies and making impact as a volunteer teacher, global youth reporter for Team of Harmony Foundation, a young leader for Women Deliver, fellow for Origin Global, which works on mental health advocacy. He's been an external reviewer for Grand Challenges Canada and the World Economic Forum. The SDGs he focuses are on good health and well-being and quality education. Our second panelist is Best Nithinwana, is a transgender human rights defender from Thailand. She was a public information assistant consultant at the UN headquarters. She supported the digital campaign of Youth Peace Security to gain the meaningful participation of women and youth in peace processes worldwide. And our third panelist is Dr. Chandramouli. Dr. Chandramouli leads the work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health at the World Health Organization's Department of SRH and Research, which includes UNDP, UNFPA, UNICEF, WHO, World Bank Human Rights Program. His work includes building the epidemiological and evidence base on adolescent reproductive sexual health and supporting countries to translate this data and evidence into action through well conceived and well managed policies and programs. So, to start with, I will first also ask the audience that if you are also aware of and had been leading similar kind of initiatives, which is promoting young people's issues and advancing their causes, please feel free to use the chat to share a few of those initiatives. It will be really very helpful to know to have this platform also as a cross learning and a cross sharing platform. To request to all the attendees who are attending both on Zoom as well as on YouTube to share some of these best practices you are leading or aware of in the chat. Now we'll move on to our first panelist, Ahmed. To just give a little bit of a background, Ahmed has been born and raised in Afghanistan. As we all know that it has been a very fragile and a conflict-ridden setting in which Ahmed had been operating. So it'll be really inspiring to understand how, as a young person, Ahmed had led promising initiatives to foster and advance young people's issues and coming up with some potential solutions to it. So, without further ado, I would request Ahmed to go ahead.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be joining all of you. Just to quickly check, am I audible? Because I have a very unstable internet in the context that I am right now.
Ahmed, you are perfectly audible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So 1.3 billion. 1.3 billion is the number of adolescents living worldwide, out of which an estimated 500 million lives in conflict zones. What we see as basic rights in some parts of the world might be a privilege or even a distant dream for them. If I scream loudly right now, how frustrated would all of us get? But for those in conflict zones, terrifying bomb sounds or their daily morning chatter. Poverty, hunger, insecurity, armed conflict, and diseases attack them all at once, making it a strong and deadly battle between them and their rights. Statistics show that mental health and alcohol and drug use are the major health problems faced by adolescents, especially in conflict zones. And based on what I see as an insider, I can definitely agree that is true. When I visited a village, a 17-year-old boy narrated to me that he lost his dad due to a missile attack and that he's the only breadwinner of his family. Out of sorrow after his father, he experiences post-traumatic stress disorder and sees flashbacks of him losing another member of his family. This is in the absence of any free healthcare facility, making him one of the 54% of adolescents with an unmet need for mental health services. Unfortunately, the conditions in conflict zones are such that the country itself allocates most of the budget for military use, and due to political constraints, external donor funding gets limited. And even if other countries are committed to support, the funds itself is either fully or partially lost in corruption. To address this, ministries of health must integrate conflict-responsive policies and programs in place that can deal with emergency epidemics, such as the horrific bomb attack in an educational center in Kabul that happened this week. Hundreds of families are bereaved, yet no single recovery method has been put into place to heal their wounds. Since community plays a central role in decision-making in most of the conflict zones, they should be primarily trained and sensitized to provide psychological support. This not only makes it accessible, but also more convenient for you to opt into, as mental health is still stigmatized in some communities. Through my initiative, Changemaker, we provide mental health services online through WhatsApp or phone calls, and our aim with this is to provide stigma-free, accessible, anonymous, and free support to those who need it. While we implement this in a limited capacity, we hope that through ongoing efforts, we can expand it broader and reach more communities across the country.
I think Ahmed is facing some internet challenges. It's pretty unfortunate, but also yeah, the reality where Ahmed is from. It's really very harrowing accounts of how adolescents and young people living in these settings face. So, in case Ahmed is not able to join back right away, I would request a host if we can play the video which Ahmed had shared with us.
Sorry, I lost. You have my voice?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Thankfully, Ahmed is back. Yes, yes. Now we can. I guess we lost last
So,
30 seconds of what you had shared. Am
what
I
was the
audible?
last word that you heard? So yes, yes, you are.
Yes, you were sharing how Changemaker, through your initiative, provides the services to adolescents and young people. I think you were elaborating more on the model of your engagement.
Okay. So I was saying that through my initiative that's called Changemaker, we provide mental health services online through WhatsApp or phone calls, and our aim is to provide stigma-free, accessible, anonymous, and free support to those who need it. While we implement this in a limited capacity, we hope to expand it broader and reach more
I think we are
communities
still
across the
facing
country.
yeah, some challenges. Just checking with the host that would it be feasible to play Ahmed's video instead?
So, am I audible? I'm sorry, I'm losing my connection is.
Yeah, Ahmed, I guess you are audible. I guess you can keep your video off. That might allow for a better
Yes.
bandwidth for your audio. Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead. Really sorry
So
for
I
all
was
the.
saying that quite often in conflict zones, adolescents and young people face stigmatization and discrimination because of their age, gender, religion, or sexual orientation.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for the situation. Yeah, we can't hear
Okay.
Ahmed's voice yet again. I
So
guess.
Necessary
maybe
training.
we can have Bess first and then put on Ahmed's video.
Sure.
Would that
Okay.
work?
Certainly. Thanks so much for the suggestion. So, I guess while Ahmed tries to figure out his internet bandwidth, we can move on to our next speaker. Also, Ahmed has a video. Maybe
I
we
can.
can also share Ahmed's video in case Ahmed is not able to get back. So, just in the interest of time, I'd request Best as a trans rights activist working in a space of Thailand, working issues on behalf of transgender people. In that queer rights space, I'm sure you had faced a lot of challenges, but also could bring together a lot of potential solutions for the world to know about, and also to get inspired and maybe able to adapt from similar kind of initiatives. So I would invite Best if you could share about your initiative and the challenges and the successes you have met in your journey. So over to you, Best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to introduce a little bit about the context of the human rights situation related to LGBT community that I'm working with. So all of you guys may have heard about the reputation of the LGBT inclusivity and also the diversity in Thailand. However, in fact, the human rights situation in Thailand, especially the LGBTQ community and LGBTQ youth, are deteriorating and not at the same of the visibility that you have seen. So my name is Bechis Nupongtuna. I'm a human rights defender, but back in 2018, I was the survival of the unfair discrimination based on gender, as I am transgender in the university. I was not allowed to wear a costume matching my gender identity at just the graduation ceremony for myself. So at that time, I trying to make a change to ask to make the regulation change. So we created the online petition to call for the regulation change. After a few weeks after that, we got 2,000 people signing the petition. And there are a few organizations related to human rights and LGBT rights coming to support us by using our case through the existing law related to gender, which is the Gender Equality Act in Thailand. So at that time, the university have to change their regulation, and we started to become the first year of the student to allow to wear the costume matching our chosen gender. At that time, I wasn't realize that Thailand was not the paradise of the LGBT rights. But when this happened to us, we realized that there are so many other things that we cannot do as we are LGBT student, as we are the transgender person. So the challenges that we received as an LGBT person inspired me to found a Young Pride Club. The Young Pride Club is the LGBTQ youth community. We're trying to support the participation of the LGBTQ youth to support the gender equality in Thailand. We do it through, we organize the youth leadership workshop. We brought youth leader, LGBTQ leader aligned from 4 regions of Thailand to come and learn about the gender equality, gender identity, so they can make the impact in the local area. From 2020, we developed youth leader for 50 of them, and a lot of them becoming the leader of their community in their local area. Some of them become a scholarship recipient, and also create the change internationally. The next solution that we would like to address based on our experience is that not only developing their knowledge, but we have to creating on the ground impact, which is we're trying to create a collaboration impact in that community. We in 2020, we organized the first Youth Pride Thailand, which organized by LGBT youth for LGBT youth. It's the first Pride that specifically for LGBT youth that brought all of the LGBT youth all over Thailand come to Bangkok. And the second one, I think, is a really great practice to monitoring and hold the government or hold the organization working on the LGBT or the youth accountable. Is to collect the information and do and evaluate the work of the government and also the organization. So what we did in 2020 is that we do the survey across Thailand for the 100 LGBTQ students. And when we heard the finding, it really impressed us. and really impress a lot of the higher education officer. So more than 60% of the LGBT youth who are informants answer that they are agree that Thailand have a very LGBTQ friendly environment, but at the same time they also agree that there are no existing regulation that protect them or prevent them from the unfair discrimination in the higher education. So this leading to the last practice to make the environment to be more inclusive is that reform the existing law to protect and prevent and fulfill the rights of the LGBT youth in Thailand and other countries. Moreover than that, supportive the effective implementation of the law related to gender and related to the children's rights. And lastly, I would like to support the existing organization, hold them accountable. We're not supporting LGBT youth by having them as a representation without meaningful participation. So we want LGBT youth to have effective, meaningful participation in decision making, in policy making, and political process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Best, and really heartfelt admiration for all the great work you have been doing. Thank you so much for sharing your initiative with us. I'll check if Ahmed, were you able to get back your internet? So if you are and can hear us, can you just wrap up your intervention maybe in 1 minute?
I'm not sure if the internet is working. Can you hear me all well?
How the different initiatives taken forward by young people themselves in this very different, difficult context, how they have been working. But also would be interesting to understand from Dr. Chandramouli, who's been working at WHO. So as an esteemed entity working on health issues across the world, Dr. Chandramouli, my question would be if you could share some good practices which, say, WHO has been doing at a global level, at a systemic level, or maybe even some country case stories which show us hope and more positive optimism towards including young people to address the issues which have been being raised throughout this webinar. So over to you, Dr. Chandramouli.
Thank you, Souvik, and namaste and greetings from WHO. I've listened with interest and with respect to the comments made by the young people thus far. And in this, in the 5 minutes I have, I'm going to speak to, as Souvik has asked me to, point to what has been and can be done. Now, I speak as a WHO public health professional. Next year, I will have been in WHO for 30 years. But I also speak as a father, as an uncle, and as someone who cares about children and adolescents in my country, which is India, but also elsewhere in the world. And our hope, our collective hope, is that all children and adolescents have the information they need, the health, education, and social services they need, and grow up in a loving and caring and safe environment to grow and develop to their full potential. As we've heard even in this, in the last 45 minutes, many groups are being left behind. And I'm going to only touch on one group in my contribution, and that is girls who are pushed out of school or who drop out of school because they get pregnant with an unintended pregnancy. And I'm going to speak about an initiative in Jamaica, but it is something that could be applicable in many other different contexts. So across the world, enormous progress has been made in reducing the levels of motherhood in childhood and adolescence. Although progress has been made, it is slow. And as this just published UNFPA report titled Motherhood in Childhood says, there are parts of the world, countries, communities, families, individuals who have been left behind. And their lot is no different than what it was 50 years ago. So that's a little shocking. It's become an unequal world. So there's inequality and there is inequity. So that's clearly the heart of this Lancet Commission. Next slide, please. But for me, over the last 10 years, the problems such as this is not the end of the discussion. They should be the start of the discussion. And I'm going to show you what these groundbreaking leaders have done in Jamaica. Jamaica is a Caribbean country. For those of us in South Asia, it's a very important country with its West Indies and cricket. So it's a country that we have a lot of affection for. Look at this. Look at what they've done. The problems are listed on this slide. No continuous education opportunities for pregnant adolescents. Limited to no re-entry opportunities for adolescent mothers in school. High rates of child second births in adolescent mothers. That was the problem that they set out to address. The Women's Center for Jamaica. So it's a feminist organization trying to address one need that they saw in their country, in their community. And they started in Kingston. They put in place actions listed on this slide to try to address education when a girl is pregnant and has to leave school, actions to help her get back to school when she becomes a mother, and action to prevent repeat pregnancies. The intervention package is listed on this slide. So they provided supplemental education to these mothers. They provided counseling to the mothers, their families, and baby fathers is a term used in Jamaica for the fathers of the babies. They supported them with school placement, with childcare and parenting skills, and with family planning and counseling services. So a package of actions which they developed over time. We published a paper which describes this work, and we will make this available to you. The next and last slide. So this program is 40 years old. They started with a small NGO initiative in Kingston. It has now been scaled up throughout the country over 40 years with matching funding from the government. The government wanted proof of principle. And once the proof of concept, as you see in that road, phase 2, once that was proven, they got funding from the government, and step by step, they've scaled up, not without problems. When they've had problems, they've scaled down, they've corrected their paths as they go. I think, as Pascal said in the introduction, they've learned as they've gone. But I just want to close with 3 points here. Look at this case study of this young woman. She was sexually assaulted when she was pregnant and got pregnant when she was 15. You know, her life would have reached a completely different trajectory if it was not for the center. She completed school, completed a professional training, and now is a health worker. For this work, the center has received a UNESCO prize in education. But this has also been scaled up nationwide and in many other countries of the Caribbean. We are now supporting its introduction in South Africa. But they've also demonstrated through many research studies that the family planning program prevented, the contraception program prevented repeat pregnancies and enabled girls to get back to school and get on with their lives. So to conclude, this is one story, and this is one inspiring story, and it's not a boutique project which has been done for 2 years with funding from outside. In the context of decolonization, this was a Jamaican initiative led by Jamaicans, funded by the Jamaican government with support from outside. And that is something that they're extremely proud about. So to conclude, I think it's important to listen to people who have problems, including adolescents, such as in this agenda, But I also think it's important to identify and celebrate solutions. And there are wonderful solutions that we have gathered in WHO over the last 10 years. So to conclude, my message is the glass is not full, but neither is it empty. It is filling slowly and with determined effort, and the efforts of all of us, like Jivitesh said, as partners, as equal partners, we can fill the glass to the brim and keep it there. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandramouli, for sharing this brilliant example and how a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach, and also how like learning through its trajectories and also initiated by people from the country, like having the primary stakeholders in the center of the solution making did make a big difference. I think this certainly sets the foundation of the panel, which was discussing about that how solutions are there, and they can completely come from people who are having the similar lived experiences, from they themselves to be able to have the solution. So I think I would also want to reiterate on this point that very young adolescents and all other different marginalized entities who spoke about, I mean, the primary stakeholders needs to be part of only not the need asking it, they should be also part of the solution, and also accountability mechanisms should also be created to ensure the systems constantly learn, take inputs from people for whom it is operating, to able to come up with promising and solutions which also would renew as we progress, as contexts also change. So with this positive note, I definitely want to thank all the panelists for sharing these brilliant initiatives, and with that optimism that we would be able to overcome the various challenges through this collaborative, a multi-stakeholder, a multi-sectoral approach, and keeping young people's participation, meaningful engagement in these processes intact. So on that positive note, I want to thank all the organizers also for giving me this opportunity to moderate this excellent panel. And I would conclude this panel with this note and would hand over to the host for the Q&A session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Souvik.
Thanks a lot, Souvik. And thank you very much to the speakers of the second panel. As also the first panel, I think it's been such an uplifting experience. We don't have too much time left, so let me go to the questions which are there. Let me take two questions, and one of them, Mukta's question, I would like to put to Dr. Chandramouli. Are there any learnings on best practices to make schools, teachers, and school administrative staff more gender sensitive and gender responsive? Would you be able to provide some examples of this, if there are any? You could have a go at this first, and then I'll open it up to the other panelists in case they have any other examples that they can share. Over to you.
Thank you, Renu. And I'll give you two tangible examples. One is a program in South Africa where there is a guardian teacher in the school. A guardian teacher who's a female, a woman, a qualified teacher and has teaching responsibilities, social studies or civics or physics. But in addition to that, she is the go-to person for any girl or boy who's experiencing bullying or sexual harassment. So this then is an acknowledged person that you can go to and ask for help, someone who has a mandate and a responsibility to do this. I've seen this system in Tanzania and South Africa, an initiative called Tazara, and also here in Switzerland, where I work. So there's one person that you can go to who is trained, who is supported, and who, like Souvik said, is accountable to listen to these young people and help them find solutions. So that is one example. The other example is an initiative that has been put in place by Rutgers, which is a Dutch NGO, the Dutch branch of IPPF. And they call it a whole of school approach. Mm-hmm. So a whole of school approach means that you don't just work with the children and try to build gender equal norms early in life. You work at multiple levels. You work at the level of the children, but you work at the level of the teachers, the principal, and the staff. Because a teacher who is being abused by her husband at home because of gender inequality is also struggling to come to the school and communicate these messages. And if we want to make the school a safe place, we had a discussion on this in our department earlier this week. There may be violence outside, but the school can say, in our school, this will not happen. And this will not happen because we as teachers and students will not allow it to happen. And that's the islands of excellence and safety that we can create. Thank you, Renu. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. The second question I would want any of the panelists to respond to, and this is Nutan Jain's question. She says, many a times bullying, failure, jealousy in love affairs, sexual harassment leads youth to self-harm, suicidal ideas and suicides. Is there any learning in this regard? I know that Ahmed was speaking about mental health in conflict situations, but there are several mental health issues which stem from the kinds of things that Nutan is speaking about. So are there any learnings about this? How can these be prevented and dealt with? Any one of the panelists, would you like to have a go at this?
I'm happy to come in, Renu, but I'll defer to others to speak.
I was just,
come in if
I'm just waiting for any of the panelists or any of the moderators. The two moderators, do you have any thoughts on this?
Ma'am, I would like to jump in.
Okay, Jivitesh, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, for this, first of all, we would have to change our mindset. It is the first point, because there are myths and stereotypes, and we consider the person who goes to a psychologist that he is mentally disturbed or anything else. So people refrain from going to a psychologist because of the because they feel that they might be bullied, that they are mentally disturbed or anything else like this. So I think that for this, we should change the mindset, and we should consult a psychologist for this.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jivitesh. So the stigma attached to mental health is something that needs to be broken. Okay. Dr. Chandramouli, would you like to offer your thoughts?
Thank you, Renu. My colleagues, Avni Amin and Claudia Garcia Moreno, they lead our work on violence against women and young girls. And they published a report recently which talks to very high levels of violence among adolescent girls. That was not in the context of COVID. In the context of COVID, we saw that this was much more. So one of the strategies is a place to reach out for help, very similar to what I mentioned in the school. So this could be a place to go to or a number to call, and someone who can say, this is the advice, this is what you can do to protect yourself, to stay out of fights in the family, to kind of calm tensions. But when it becomes unbearable, this is the number you can call or a place you can go for some support. So, to constantly communicate to young people as to where they can reach for help.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Chandramouli. So we have to begin concluding this very lively and exciting webinar today. Pema, yes, if you want to make a point very briefly.
Yeah, sure. Also adding on to the thing we're talking about, I think it's also very important to have that kind of conversation going on within the youth and within the family about this, and awareness on the importance of knowing what this exactly is and how to navigate through your own mindfulness, to understand, to not associate these kind of incidences, to not promote bullying in terms of sexual and in terms of sexual activities and sexual interactions. Also to promote very safe and enabling space for young people to share their experiences within their peer, within family, as well as even in the schools. We can have those kind of groups. We can have those kind of counseling sessions, regular counseling session. We can integrate these kind of moral and ethical values, these kind of learnings into the course syllabus as well, to promote more conversation, to promote more enabling space for young people to share and have those conversation, have those peer building ups, and have those open space within the family and school spaces. That's what I wanted to add.
Renu, can I take 30 seconds?
Okay, all right.
Look at this slide, and essentially it reinforces what Pema just said. Discussions in the family, but reach out to supportive family, friends, or neighbors. Call a hotline or access information online if possible, and seek out local services for survivors. So, look for support and, try to reduce the problems, but you can't, seek help. Happy to share this as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And I think the discussion's actually just heating up, but we need to wind up now. So thank you all very, very much. I personally have learned a lot, and my big takeaway from today's webinar is that it is absolutely essential to create an enabling environment for young people to organize themselves, to create that safe space that Pema was talking about, wherein they can find in themselves the ability and the potential to contribute their ideas and thoughts in a very creative way into the policy making, decision making, and program formulation spaces. I am very sorry that Ahmed didn't get a chance to speak to us directly. We promised to share his video with all of you, and there are several of you who contributed in the chat. And we're going to compile all of this and make sure that it goes into our report for the Lancet Commission. With this, I thank each one of you and hand over to Pascal for her closing and concluding remarks. Thank you all very, very much.
Great. Thank you, Renu. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, SAHAJ and Arrow, for co-hosting this wonderful, wonderful seminar. And thank you all for joining. I personally start my day totally inspired and hopeful for the future. But there's a lot that we in leadership and privileged positions need to do. We need to explicitly and regularly step aside and create the spaces to amplify the voices of youth, recognizing that nothing we do matters if it doesn't work for them. It's not our future, it's theirs. Join the conversation. Let's be solutions oriented and walk the talk. Join us again on October 27th for the next webinars, which is with our Changemaker partners. And this work is, again, very much about listening to the voices of those who we're supposed to be doing this work for. Please join us. I'm sure you'll find it fascinating. Thank you and have a good day, morning, afternoon, evening. Thank you again. Bye-bye.